Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back. Today we've got Christopher Harper in the studio with us. Christopher's a counselling psychologist, registered with the HPCSA, and he has a special interest in, what was it?
Men and masculinity.
Men and masculinities.
Yeah.
So Christopher's in private practice, and he provides psychotherapeutic interventions at ARC Recovery Center. And so today we're just going to have a general chat and maybe discuss some of the stuff around your special interests. Cool. So Chris, do you want to start? I mean, what interested you in psychology, and how did you get involved?
First year varsity, I did psychology 1 and I hated it. It was kind of just didn't make any sense to me. It was all multiple choice, or in my case, multiple guess answers. But kind of as I moved through my career, I reached a point where I kind of felt I needed more skills to be able to help the people I was working with.
Okay.
And so I went back to varsity and studied kind of night classes.
So initially, what were you just doing, like counseling or?
Well, my first kind of position, I worked as an Anglican priest.
Okay. Cool.
And there was a time kind of when I felt I kind of needed more skills, and also kind of needed to look at my long-term future and what kind of that was going to be.
Sure.
So I went out, and Rhodes University had a branch in East London where they offered evening classes. So I went back and started psychology 2, did psychology 3 the next year, and then they began an honours course, which I managed to be part of, and then they opened masters, and I was fortunate enough to be selected for their first master's course.
Okay.
So kind of I did that while still working. In between, I also, it was kind of the bad old days of kind of conscription and the rest of it, and I was kind of objected to going to the army, and I got given this kind of sentence of community service.
Oh.
So with that, I went to go and work at the AIDS training centre in East London. At that time, I think there were like 140 known cases of AIDS in the Eastern Cape. So it was right early in the pandemic.
Yeah.
And so all of that kind of stuff and the need for more counselling skills kind of came together at that time.
Okay.
And that's where it kind of resulted in me doing this.
Okay. And getting into the addiction field?
Well, I then started working at an NGO that dealt with violence against women and girls, working with men. And the issues of substance abuse leading to violence were particularly high. So while working with men, I kind of needed to teach myself the skills about addiction in order to be able to work with them. So we were able both to kind of work with the women who were experiencing the violence and getting them to understand the whole cycle of addiction, but also working with the men themselves and helping them to kind of see themselves differently and to be able to move it forward.
Okay. So I think, this is like a relatively conservative country from all sort of angles and all cultures, right?
Big time.
So I think I can imagine that being a bit of a difficult process, eh?
It wasn't a very easy one, but what we would do, I developed a program where we would go into communities and train men who would then go and train other men within their own communities to do it.
Okay.
So it wasn't kind of all just one-on-one stuff, but it was really giving communities the power to be able to do that, and working with men to help them connect with women's groups and organizations in their community to make them more accountable and more responsible for who they were.
So it sounds like a lot more of a social worker function as opposed to like psychology, right?
No, this is kind of looking at the way in which we socialize, looking at the way in which we kind of brought up, looking at the way in which our lives are constructed.
Sure.
Definitely doing it kind of from that sort of psychological background. A lot of my training was in narrative therapy. So it's also about looking at the stories of our lives and how we kind of live them out and how we kind of make them happen
Mm.
in communities. So it was really about kind of changing the paradigm, because especially in the Eastern Cape, the number of psychologists who were working in communities was very limited. So we had to create the space for more psychological services to be able to be created, and this was one of the ways of doing that, was basically using a primary healthcare model.
Okay. Okay. Tell me something. So, I've heard that homes generally that have absent fathers,
Yeah.
the kids generally grow up to have sort of substance use issues and things like antisocial issues, things like that, right?
Yeah, it depends on other factors as well. I think if you look at kind of this country and the history of the country, if you look at the dislocation of families, we're in a place where so many men especially have kind of grown up in single parent households. And fortunately, as much as kind of there's that outcome that's possible from that, also research has shown that just having one role model can also make such a major difference in preventing that. But certainly issues around maladjustment, issues around kind of people seeing themselves as not having their needs met, certainly do come through in that way. And a lot of the men who we work with in ARC, for example, have come through families where there has been that kind of dislocation. And so they end up finding themselves not really knowing who they are or where they want to go through. Also, the role models that they have to kind of live their life going forward are often not very positive. And so that has created a space where kind of the cycle of addiction just continues.
So like why do you think it's important to have role models?
I think role models provide us with the opportunity to be able to see who we can be and what we can be. The problem sometimes is that we idolize people to such a degree that when they kind of show their own weakness, that then we kind of let everything fall apart around them.
When you say weakness, like, are you saying like being when they show vulnerability?
No, I think vulnerability is cool.
Okay.
I think it's important to be vulnerability, but I think more weakness when they may kind of go off and hurt themselves, engage in self-harming practices where their own emotional triggers come through, and the way in which they respond to emotional problems, the way in which they respond to their social relationships comes through and they struggle with. And then very often a lot of the young guys will say, well, I saw that happen in him, and so I didn't believe in him anymore. So kind of creating almost idols out of people instead of realizing that we're human, and as humans we've got weaknesses. We struggle with issues.
Okay. I think with the you mentioned briefly the sort of history of South Africa and how that might impact on people's or men in particular, how that may have impacted on their sort of ability to get vulnerable, right? I mean, do you still see a lot of that today?
Yeah, we see lots of that. One of my favorite quotes is that the social problems of yesterday become the psychological problems of today.
Okay, cool.
And kind of if you look back at the situations, and I look back into kind of my own environment and the people who I grew up around and my friends at the time, the school I went to was also very militaristic. Everything was kind of organized around school cadets and order and this excessive kind of discipline. Thinking was kind of curtailed. If you kind of started thinking differently outside of the box, you were kind of pigeonholed as being strange, as being weird. So we also had this thing where young guys grew up believing that they needed to be hard, kind of. Nice words on TV once famously said, "Cowboys don't cry," and so you kind of grew up with this idea that as men you had to be hard, in control, powerful, strong all the time, which is just not possible. It's not really true. So what we do as men is kind of we need to find an outlet for that. So the one emotion that it was okay for men to kind of express was anger.
Okay.
So it's fine if you get angry. It's fine if you get cross, because then you're showing you're strong. You're showing you're a big, tough guy. But all of the other things that men felt, kind of the fear, the anxiety, all of those things kind of were just left. And they had to go somewhere. You had to deal with them in some way. And so for a lot of guys, that kind of was played out in the violent behavior they engaged in. It played out a lot in risky kind of behavior, alcohol, drugs, kind of excessive sex, violence, all of these sorts of things kind of came together as part of men's lives moving forward.
I think especially in sort of the Cape area, hey?
Well, I think the Eastern Cape is kind of where I grew up.
Sure.
So I know that area.
Sure, okay.
And the conservatism that kind of was there created a really tough place to kind of grow up. And so now we kind of hear a lot and read a lot about the importance of being vulnerable, the importance of being able to be aware of what you're going through and to be able to express it and deal with it. But in those times, kind of it was creating a generation of men who didn't have that kind of opportunity. And so as long as we still kind of have these very strong patriarchal models of what it means to be a man, we're really screwing guys up and screwing their lives up. And we find a lot in ARC of the guys who come in, especially guys late 50s to mid 60s who've kind of grown up in that time, who've had that kind of upbringing, especially from their fathers, who kind of come in with those sorts of issues.
So, I mean, in an environment where there's a lot of violence and aggression and, you know, all of those sort of masculine, you know, when I use the word toxic masculine sort of issues, in an environment like that, doesn't it just start snowballing? Because there's utility in being a strong, aggressive guy in an environment like that, right?
Yep.
And it can save your life, eh?
Well, it can save your life, but it also can put your life into risk. And so it kind of becomes a balance that you need to be able to achieve.
So I don't know if Carl Jung talks about integrating your shadow, right?
Yep.
So being a warrior in a garden as opposed to being a gardener in a war. There's utility in being sort of imposing and have the potential for aggression and things like that, but keeping that in check.
That's the important part, is to be able to know how and when to be able to use things properly.
Sure.
But if it becomes your only way of acting, your only way of being, your only way of thinking, if everything is always aggressive, you kind of lose that other part of you.
Yeah.
That part of you that enables you to love and care and feel.
Yeah.
And so what we'll also find is that a lot of the guys who come in, when we talk about them, they'll talk about things like, they'll say their father never ever said they loved them. Their father never ever, there was never ever kind of any hugging or kind of
show
that
vulnerability,
physical presence.
Sure, okay.
But that there'd be a handshake.
Yeah.
And guys now kind of later on in life saying, you know what, that's also what I learned. That's the way I treated my kids. And now there's no kind of real connection between my kids and me as well. And so it kind of has this, as you were saying earlier, this kind of snowball effect where it just kind of goes from one generation to one generation. And sometimes, somewhere, somebody's got to stop it.
Sure.
And say no more.
Yeah. I think From my perspective, how I can relate to that, right? So being in business, especially in this climate and with the way things are at the moment, a lot of people are really struggling, and it's really tough. It's very easy to become jaded and cynical, when trying to do business with people, right? And the thought is always to sort of go back to, like, what is this person up to, and so on and so forth, right? Having said that, you can't walk around sort of not trusting everybody that you interact with, right? So it's important to give a level of trust, and sort of, there's moments where you need to be diplomatic,
but it's okay to kind of be in that place. The thing is that we often just want to think of things as in terms of black and white.
Sure.
So either absolutes. But the truth is, we don't live in a world of absolutes.
Yeah.
We live kind of there's a wonderful mystical book from many years ago called The Cloud of Unknowing.
Okay.
And a lot of our lives is kind of lived in that unknowing. It's lived kind of in the grey. And we kind of have to exist and make our choices within those kind of areas. And that's where it's important to be able to have that kind of ability to say, am I doing what's best for me going forward?
Well, there's a movie called Ad Astra with Brad Pitt, right? And there's a cool quote where he says, I'm uncertain of the future, but I'm not afraid.
Yeah.
And I think that's a cool place to be. Is it's okay to be uncertain of what's going to happen in the future, but
but the thing is, we kind of grow up believing that there has to be this certainty. We have to know,
control it.
And when we kind of move away from that power and control, then kind of the world just seems a little bit of an unsafe space, and it creates anxiety.
Well, I watched this video where this guy spoke about when you on a ship and you've got that wheel and when there's a storm, if you let go of the wheel, the ship will make it through the storm in its own way. So it's like letting go of that control, or that excessive control. It's difficult though.
Yeah, but again, I think that what we need to be is kind of the things that we can control and the things that it's important for us to be in control of. We're in control of those. But when we try and be in control of things that actually we'll never be in control of, we won't have the opportunity, and we invest all our energy and time and thoughts and everything into that, all that does is kind of create psychological havoc for us.
But I mean, do you see a lot of people, having to field things that are out of their control, like, the water outages and, the threat of, for example, land without expropriation of land without compensation. I mean, that's a serious threat to somebody who might own a property, a farm or whatever the case, right? I mean, do you see a lot of people of that kind of thing translating into serious resentment that gets out of control?
Yeah, I think what happens is we kind of start turning our anger at the wrong people.
Sure.
Yeah, and instead of being able to kind of focus our thoughts, keep ourselves, be aware, first of all, of what we're going through, of what the thoughts are that we're having, and then being able to kind of focus and make proper decisions going forward, we end up kind of just making blanket statements and moving ourselves into places where we kind of feel powerless and hopeless instead of looking and saying, well, actually, what hope do we have? What opportunities are there? And it's one of the things we find as well with the clients in ARC is that they kind of tend to lose a sense of their own power. And part of being in recovery is about regaining your power. It's regaining your ability to kind of take control over yourself, over your emotions, over your thoughts, and not to let everything else deal with you. So much about what we actually do in addiction work actually fits into kind of normal everyday therapy work.
Sure.
Because there's no real difference. It's just that sometimes people use different ways of dealing with those kind of feelings than other people do.
So, yeah, and I don't know if I'm wading into risky territory here. So, some of the patients on occasion, there's been some racially charged kind of tensions, right? If you want to put it that way, and those are always difficult to navigate, right?
Yeah.
Because there's historical sort of like intensive resentments and from all angles, right? Do you find that challenging to deal with?
It can be challenging to deal with, but I think that the most important thing, though, is to be able to understand how and where people are coming from. Is that I think we kind of live in a country in which we don't actually talk to each other, we talk at each other. So we don't listen to the stories, we don't hear where people's pain is, we don't hear where resentment is. And I mean, the truth is that however many years, 28 years after the first kind of elections, nothing has changed for so many people. Kind of unemployment has kind of increased. There's so much more kind of need within the country as well, and the difficulties about doing that. So it kind of hasn't really created a space where we've been able to sit and to talk and being able to kind of find common space amongst us where we're able to say, you know what, let's actually start building and moving together. People by and large are still kind of in their old cliques, old groups, and if you look at a lot of the incidents that are happening, some of the kids of today are still being taught the same racism that their parents were taught.
Sure.
And that's also got to come to an end. There's got to be a time to be able to stop that and to say, actually, I've got to look inside. I've got to look at what my makeup is in order to move it forward.
I think so. I wanna also just touch on how this pandemic and the associated lockdowns have had impacts on certain industries, and that in turn had impact on people's sort of like prospects for employment.
Sure.
People have lost jobs. Not having a job. We mentioned it. We discussed it. Touched on it a bit earlier. Not having a job can be a very depressing thing.
Yeah.
It's important to wake up every morning, with a purpose and get up and, even if you don't really like your job very much, at least it's bringing you an income. It's you getting up, you're doing something.
You're interacting, you're social.
That's also important, sure.
And a big part of what kind of lockdown has done, I mean, we use this terrible term, kind of social isolation. I mean, it should have been physical isolation as the term we used.
Sure.
As human beings, we kind of connect with each other and we need each other. So when we kind of talk about being socially isolated, it's kind of a terrible thing. We're taking part of our humanity away from us. But yes, you're right. I mean, the impact of people who kind of were in jobs for a long time and suddenly that kind of rug was pulled from under them was immense. It kind of questions their identity. It questions who they are, the way they see themselves, the way they interact, their ability to contribute to their homes, to their families. And so it kind of creates that form of depression and also the anxiety, because then the question is, what's going to happen going forward? What's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to my family? And we've seen the number of people who've lost their homes, who've kind of families have split up, the number of people who've kind of come in for treatment because they haven't been able to deal with it, so they've resorted to the bottle. Their kind of drug intake has increased. So it's created all of these kind of social issues and psychological problems for people as well.
So from a masculine point of view, we know a person sort of losing their job, a guy that sort of might have that, like you mentioned earlier, that sort of think of himself as the breadwinner and he needs to be in control and in charge and sort of look after his family and all of those things. Is there, what do you think you could say to somebody like that who's lost their job? They haven't been employed for 6 months, they aren't paying the bond, things are falling apart, and they feel like they're sort of failed?
First thing is it's okay to be depressed. And we kind of always want to run away from those kind of feelings and those kind of emotions. But given what guys have gone through, it's okay to be in that kind of place. But it's about, do you sit there and stay in that place, or do you start moving on and start healing? And so one of the things that we do is we kind of start saying, well, okay, let's talk about your identity. Let's talk about who you are. Let's talk about your skills. Let's talk about your abilities. Let's talk about what's possible. So moving the conversation away from just kind of having a negative outlook to being a lot more kind of positive with it, and starting to kind of make plans. Because one of the things about depression is that you stop being able to see any kind of future. You're kind of just stuck in the darkness of what is now. And so it's to be able to challenge that and to be able to work through. Is it easy? No. But it's also about, in those cases, being able to say, you know what, so what are you still able to contribute at home? How are you able to do things? And it's difficult for some guys, because as guys, like you said, our role is kind of to be the breadwinner, to bring the money in, to keep everything under control. But sometimes kind of, if the role needs to change, and to say, actually, while you're going out and earning the money because you've still got a job as my wife, my partner, I can do things that are also positive. So guys learning to care for their children is both beneficial for the children in the way that they kind of going to react to their fathers, and the way they're going to see a different way of being. But also it gives the fathers a different opportunity to respond in a different way to the children as well.
I think, so not having employment, there's only so many sort of doors you can knock on in a day, and so many CVs you can email in a day, and jobs you can apply for, right? But sort of like parking at home and going downstairs for breakfast, and then getting back on the bed and watching TV all day, like, obviously isn't the most constructive thing, and that can kind of snowball. I've thought about sort of volunteering as a very cool solution to the connection, the social connection issue, because, like, as you mentioned earlier, being social and sort of connecting with other people is incredibly important.
I like the idea of being able to volunteer and do things, and it comes down to the idea of looking at your skill set and saying, actually, what am I good at? And are there places actually that I can still go and contribute and be part of?
How can I still feel useful?
Yeah, something bigger than myself.
Sure.
One of my favorite quotes is that people are contagious. So if you hang around negative people, you're going to take on their negative energy. If you hang around people who kind of positive, it's going to improve and kind of give you positive energy as well. We see the same thing in rehab, is that if somebody comes in and they're intensely negative about everything that's kind of going to be happening, that kind of negativity will start spreading among some of the others who'll start hearing it. But if you've got people who are coming in together and saying, we're in this because this is kind of our goal and this is what we want to achieve, that will make a massive difference. So being able to do that is important. Being able to start revisioning your life, storing who you are, instead of kind of saying, well, there's only one part and one story to my life.
I think it obviously, for people that are because circumstantial kind of issues that are obviously depressing, like losing your job, right? Those kinds of things aren't necessarily the same as clinical depression, right?
No.
Okay. So I think anybody that might hear this and sort of go, well, I literally feel like I'm stuck in mud. I can't bring myself to even like wash myself or like shower or whatever. And you guys are telling me to go out and volunteer. Like, what sort of suggestions or what do you think we can say to somebody in that position?
I think when you kind of in this place of clinical depression, there's the need, first of all, to be able to kind of have proper counseling in that regard is important. Right? Have somebody who truly understands what it means to be in that place, because as a society, we still also don't understand what depression is. We're in a place where we kind of give our time away and kind of snap out of it, get over it, it's not bad, suck it up, and all kinds of other things to people. So find proper help and proper counseling from people who can support you. A lot of people don't like kind of going on some of the medication, but there's a lot of really good medication out there that's not addictive and that can also kind of help balance all of the levels in your brain to kind of help and get you through those kind of things. The other thing we've got to do as a society is be able to change things from kind of remove the stigma that comes with depression, because people who are depressed, a lot of people kind of look down and say, well, they can't cope, useless, weak, willed, but it's not true. They're kind of suffering from a disease, and we need to be able to assist them with them to move it forward.
And it's okay to talk about mental health. It's okay to be vulnerable.
Oh, it's important that we do it.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it comes back to that same old thing, and this is kind of where, again, this issue of men and masculinities comes in, especially with men, is we kind of create a place where we kind of tell men it's not okay to go for help because you've got to be big, strong, tough, you've got to take it. But all we're doing is kind of recreating a society of guys who've got nowhere to go.
Yeah. And you probably cause more trouble than we need to have. Eh?
It makes us emotionally vulnerable because although we don't want to recognize it, we then are at the kind of the prey of our emotions. We act in ways in which we just really self-harm.
Okay.
And harm others.
Sure.
When we look at maladjustment, we're really talking about the way in which people's lives kind of are set up. And one of the things that I've seen and that I believe about us is that so much of us is kind of determined in the first few years of our life. And it sets out a template that often we kind of play out throughout the rest of our lives unless we kind of move into a place where we say this and no more. So if kind of we grow up in this society or this family where our needs are not met, or where emotionally we kind of aren't cared for in the way that we need to be. If we go to school and our schooling is such that kind of our interaction with our teachers and our peers puts us into a place where we're feeling more vulnerable, we kind of create a template that we start living out throughout the rest of our lives. And that's why therapy is so important, to be able to come and to challenge that and to say, actually, it doesn't need to be. And there's kind of all of these other components that come together to make up who we are and how our lives fit together.
So going through that process and sort of having those issues and not having them recognized or dealt with does translate into sort of patterns that we end up living out throughout our lives. Sure.
Yeah.
And I think it's, recognizing that isn't sort of playing the victim. It's not like I've got ADD and my whole life is messed up because my schooling career was horrible and my teachers were so ugly to me or whatever. It's just about sort of, it's like your eyes go bad, you get a pair of glasses.
Yep.
That's it.
There's stuff that we can't change, but we can change who we are now and the way in which we respond to that.
Sure.
We can also, though, and this is the thing I enjoy about doing narrative therapy, is that you can also kind of start looking back, because we tell multiple stories about our lives. So if we go back and instead of just focusing on all the negative parts of our lives and start looking and saying, well, actually, what did I learn in that situation about myself? Sure, my family life was screwed up, but there was were the parents of a friend of mine who were really good and kind to me, or there was this one teacher at school who was really caring for me, and I was able to learn these things from them. So you're able to kind of change the way in which you see your life, and change those areas of your life that you give focus to. And being able to do that also gives you the opportunity to look forward with more hope and being more positive, because you're not changing what's happened to you, but you're just changing where you're putting your focus on it. And being able to do that is just really so important. To be in a place where now we're able to look forward and to start seeing actually there are opportunities, there is some kind of hope for me to do things, instead of kind of just being stuck in one particular way of being is so important.
So you've done a lot of work at ARC, obviously, in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
How's that experience been? What have you taken from it?
Oh, I've loved ARC. And I'm not just saying it because I work there. The thing to me that's most exciting is you kind of have 21, 24 days maybe max with the people who kind of come in there. And to be able to see the change that happens in people within that short period of time is amazing. In kind of normal therapeutic practice where you see somebody maybe once a week, maybe once a month, that sort of change, you don't kind of see the rapidness of it. You don't see kind of the sparks that sometimes fly as much as you do working in ARC. And so that's been amazing. And then to be able to work with people for that initial period and then still work with them for another time afterward, and to see how they've managed to kind of keep it going and are still clean and sober kind of after 2 years, it's just the most incredible feeling to see. And again, it's about how it affects not only them, but also the people who are close to them, their loved ones, their families, their wife, their kids. And that's just an incredible feeling to be part of it.
I think, so I read this quote yesterday, we're all just walking each other home. And I thought that really, I liked that.
Yeah, I like that.
And you're right, it is cool to see people, getting back on their feet and transcending challenges and doing well.
But it's also okay for the guys who kind of struggle and come back. I think even the coming back is an act kind of courage.
Definitely.
Because many people don't kind of make it the first time. It's a difficult disease to work with and to deal with. So the fact that they're able to come back and say, you know what, I need to come back, I need some more help, I need to move my life forward, is a really important thing to be able to do. It's about never giving up. And a lot of people kind of look down and say, they've relapsed again, they're terrible. But a lot of guys just never give up. They may relapse, but they get back on the horse, they keep moving forward. And that's just so important to be able to be in that place and to acknowledge that in them. I think one of the things is that the stereotypes around people who kind of come into rehab are just so crazy. And we kind of tend to kind of pass them off as being people who kind of no good. But the truth is, these are really good people at heart who doing their best to make it through, doing their best to make a change.
I think addicts, people that have addiction problems, can be some of the most intelligent, hardworking, good good people.
They're just normal people.
Yeah.
Who kind of have an issue with addiction. Somebody else out there may kind of have an issue with his temper. That doesn't mean kind of because it's temper versus alcohol that there's kind of a quantitative or qualitative difference between the two. We are all just people who struggle.
Yeah, the stigma doesn't help, eh?
No.
And I think that's difficult because, I mean, you mentioned relapsing, so even after many years of a good run,
Sure.
good run of sobriety, and doing really well. It can happen.
Mhm.
People fall off and hit their face, and the things go wrong, right?
Yeah.
And that's okay. I think you mentioned giving up, and I always try and imagine, like, what does giving up look like? Like, does it look like suicide? Does it look like, oh well, I'm just gonna move to the beach and smoke myself to death type of thing? I think when people also when they're in a position where they do have responsibilities, and they've got a family and things like that, giving up isn't an option.
Yeah,
Not an
absolutely.
option. So yeah, relapsing can be miserable, and people will have things to say, and they might judge you, but it's okay.
It is okay, and
Yeah.
it's kind of all part of your journey, and that's kind of what people don't want to see. It is that we all kind of have on our own journey, and sometimes we'll stumble. But it's about what you do when you stumble. It's kind of the quote attributed to Muhammad Ali: "What if I get knocked down 8 times? I'm going to get up 9." I mean, it's kind of that sort of way with life. Is that it becomes too easy to move into this judgmental way of looking at people instead of saying this is their story, this is the way the road that they walk in, and my role as a psychologist with them is to sit and walk that road with them. I can't lead them, I can't push them in it. I've just got to walk their road with them, and where they allow me to be part of their journey, where they allow me to assist it's to be part of that, because I think often people kind of have this kind of mistaken idea about rehab. Rehab is not really about saying, well, it's about what I'm getting rid of. It's about what I'm gaining. And that kind of focus has really got to be positive, because it's not just, well, I'm getting rid of the drugs, but it's I'm gaining my thought patterns back.
Sure.
I'm gaining my relationships back. I'm gaining intimacy back. I'm gaining new opportunities for myself. So if you kind of start focusing on the positives, on the things that you're really developing, finding in yourself again, that's, to me, is the really exciting part about all of this going forward.
Because life doesn't have to stay miserable and tragic and sure.
I mean, as humans, we have this incredible ability for resilience. I mean, despite COVID, we're still around, we're still functioning, we're still moving. There's still opportunities. If you go back, we've got a history of this country, but the world in general. As people, we've always kind of bounced back. We're always looking to develop, to move things on. And we need to allow people who come into rehab that same opportunity and that same right to do that.
Sure. Anything else that you want to?
I think the other thing that for me is so important, and it relates to a lot of what we've been talking about, is context is so important. Is that we often kind of think everybody must kind of fit into a particular box going forward, and that's it. Instead of recognizing and realizing that, you know what, we are all unique, we are all different.
Different circumstances, sure.
We come from different places, different families, different upbringings, things that kind of make a difference in our lives. But and if we're going to be able to challenge that, we've got to understand the context. And often we kind of just want to put our own lenses on and see people through our own lenses instead of looking at them through their own. And that makes a massive change to be able to do that.
I had, my father-in-law, okay, there have been moments where we haven't seen eye to eye, okay, and he's a really cool guy. He's very enthusiastic guy. He's like happy most of the time, right? But he's like he can be very disagreeable, right? So I'm on the other sort of end of I'm very disagreeable, but I'm also very neurotic, right? So like overanalyze everything and lots of negative emotion and all the rest of it. And we bump heads, when discussing sort of things about, like what does happiness mean, and I think recognizing that he's an enthusiastic guy, that he's disagreeable, You know, that he might not have interests in the same sort of like abstract ideas that I do, and I don't have the same interest in the same sort of like practical things that he does. Recognizing that in those personality traits in other people, like I think that really helps give perspective, you know, and helps give context. Hey,
yeah, it's just so important to be able to do that. And it's also one of the things that I try and teach the guys we work with, is that whenever somebody says something to you, ask who's saying it, where does it come from, what is their context, before you kind of just assume that it's all anti you, or kind of you've got to believe it and what they're saying about you is right. Put it in context, understand where it comes from, and take it forward.
So I've heard often, you know, I've often been told by my therapist, what other people have to say about you says more about them generally than it does about you.
Absolutely, I fully agree with that. And the other thing is that often we kind of put so much time and effort into thinking about what other people are thinking about us, but the truth is they're too busy in their own heads thinking about their own stuff and everything going on in their own lives to really give a damn about us.
Having said that, Chris, like I've had experiences where very close friends and people that are close to me have criticized me in like the most personal kind of way. And it's been devastating to me. It really has, to like have to try and sort of process that, and I'll go off and I'll overanalyze it, and I'll be like, okay, where are they coming from? And like, you know, I think it's easier said than done when it comes to kind of just sort of, you know, dismissing what other people have to say as their own perspective.
Well, I don't think you need to necessarily dismiss it.
Okay.
Because I think what you do is you go through it and say, well, okay, so this is where it's coming from. This is the context. Is what they're saying about me true, yes or no? If it is true, then do something about it if you need to, if you want to. If it's not true, well, then you kind of dismiss it. But if it is true, then certainly do something about it. So, but the issue is that we like to obsess about stuff. And that's kind of where we get stuck. So instead of obsessing, sit and ask yourself, is it true? If it is true, how do I change it? And do I want to change it? And take it forward from there.
And sometimes being happy is more important than being right.
Absolutely. we like to be right
straight
all the time.
Yeah, sure.
But being right is also about the power stuff. Because I'm in control then.
Okay.
I kind of know things.
Sure.
Instead of being in a place to say, actually, well, maybe I don't know everything. Maybe I'm a bit more vulnerable there too, in my own knowledge and understanding.
Chris, it's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I've taken a lot from it personally for myself, and I hope, you know, I'm pretty sure that anybody watching it's gonna take a lot away from it. Thanks for coming through.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, Ryan.